So this is another very, very important section in terms of forming the right mental model about how TypeScript works. And I've titled it Declaration Merging, but we're going to look deeply into how Visual Studio Code's tooltips provide us with information that we can use to figure out whether something's a value, whether something's a type. Additionally, this helps us understand how we can put little fixes on top of libraries or imperfect type information, or maybe you want to prototype something and types don't exist for it yet. This helps you augment some of the existing type information in your app. So let's look at section 8 of the notes. In TypeScript app, identifiers, and just think of these as things that you could export. Internally, TypeScript calls these symbols. Identifiers can be associated with up to 3 things: a value, a type, or a namespace. A namespace we haven't talked about yet, but it's pretty simple in that it's sort of like an object in that it has a type and it has a value. So in this situation, we could do baz.biz. It's just sort of a collection of stuff all merged together. Not really worth covering on its own, and increasingly less popular as a tool to describe things. So I'm going to show you how you can, given a symbol, you can test whether it can be used as a type. And we've already been doing this. Sorry, we're going to test for a value first. And this is very intuitive. You should be able to complete an assignment of some sort. Should be, if it's a value, a variable should be able to hold it. If you get a type error here, something's wrong. Let's try it with the interface. No good. Bar only refers to a type, but it's used as a value here. So this is an effective test to see if something is a value. How to test if something's a type? Try to use it as a type. Try to use it on the left-hand side of an equals. Or if it's a let, you don't even have to do that. So if you can do that successfully, bar can be regarded as a type. To test whether something is associated with a namespace, you're going to have to rely on tooltips for that. And just note that all 3 of these things are importable and exportable. There's our interface, there's our value, and there's our namespace. So now we kind of have the tests we can apply to things to figure out what's going on. So functions and variables, they are purely values. You can only extract the type of a value using a type query. Interfaces are only types. If we try to complete an assignment here, we get the same error we were seeing above. Address only refers to a type, and it is being used as a value here. Classes, this is where things get interesting, they pass both the value and the type tests. And here's what is going on. On one hand, a class is a factory to produce instances, right? It has a constructor. It has a prototype. Recently, I think JavaScript, you can even do this now. We can have static members, right, where we can access this right off of the class. So this is all associated with the factory of instances. On the other hand, using this as a type describes the instances themselves. It can be used as almost like an interface for the instance. So we can see this symbol, contact, works in both positions. Up here, we can capture the class itself. Down here, we can use it as a type. So it kind of occupies both slots. when declarations have the same name, they kind of all stack on top of each other. And if you arrange things just the right way, mainly you don't have values that collide with other values, you can end up with something that looks like this, where when we export album and look at this tooltip, this is a value, a type, and a namespace all stacked on top of each other, all sort of riding along on the same symbol. This is where, I don't want you to gloss over the information in your tooltips. This tells you a lot. This tells you it's a class, there's an interface of the same name that augments that class, and there's a namespace. So we could pass the type test here, and that is we wouldn't even need the interface in order to do that because the class has a type in and of itself. The interface just merges on top of the class, and that means that if we had another album here, new album, and then al2 dot, we can see that the interface has added this property artist. This is what you do if someone's forgotten to add something in type information for a library. You could, through an interface, kind of stack on top of that. And it applies globally through your entire app. So there's only sort of one scope for where type information is held. It's not on a per module basis. It is holistically throughout the app.
Even without importing or exporting it?
Even without importing or exporting. What is that?
If you do an override in your level, but you import it from outside somewhere, you're saying it's still app-wide?
Yes, the modification you make will happen app-wide. And this is important because you might want to make all of your modifications in one file and then, have that take effect elsewhere. There are certain things like types for globals that would be really inconvenient to try to import and re-export because there is no concept of that. Good examples of that would be jQuery or Mocha, which it makes describe and it. Those are global functions that you don't have to explicitly import. So namespaces, they have kind of their own spot in that we can see on this tooltip a namespace is neither a class nor an interface, right? It's its own thing, and it's part of this thing being exported. They can be merged with classes or functions. So here's an example of a class where we can see we've got address book. And what we're doing here, this is equivalent to what some languages would call an inner class, where you've got you have a class that is namespace with respect to a parent class. So when we call our new, we're having to say addressbook dot AB contact. The reason that this is allowed is because a namespace serves to sort of tack things on to something, right? It's just tacking AB contact onto addressbook. And there's no ambiguous syntax here. Addressbook is only something that can be invoked, right? Because the constructor is a function. So if we were to introduce a collision, we'd run into problems like this. So now we've got two things, like addressbook.ab contact. Is it a string? Is it a class? Something's got to get resolved here. But it is largely the static side of this class. Similarly, because it works with classes, we can expect that it will work for functions since classes are just functions, right? They're factories. We invoke classes by using the new keyword. And so similarly, we can use format this way, but we also have stored this const currency, which is used inside format, right? So it can kind of reference the namespace here. And there is no collision here. We either invoke the function or we use some of these things that we've tacked onto the function. In terms of the things I want you to take away from a mental model perspective, knowing what's a type and knowing what's a value will take you a long way. And knowing what can be augmented interfaces versus knowing what you kind of have to leave alone when they're defined in types. Values. So once you have a value, like, it's hard, you can't override that because that would conflict with the way JavaScript behaves. But interfaces are fair game.